Hello and welcome back, and that is right, it is finally time to review this. This is Synology's new router. This is the RT6600ax, and in today's video we are going to be deep diving into this system and then some. You've probably already looked at the time bar underneath us and gone, man alive, that is a long one. Trust me, it's worth it. In today's video, not only are we going to be doing the unboxing, not only are we going to take a close look at the system, talking about what it can and can't do, and talking a lot more about the specifics of 5.9 gigahertz. But on top of that, we're going to be deep diving into SRM 1.3. We're going to be looking at DS Router 2.0 for Android, and hopefully at the end of this video, answer 3 simple questions. 1, is this system good value for money? 2, should you buy this as your first router into the Wi-Fi 6 world? And question 3, is this worth an upgrade to your existing Synology router? Because everyone coming into this is thinking those 3 wonderful questions, and hopefully in today's video it will answer that. So again, I know this is a long video. I'm going to be doing a should you buy that's going to be like 8 minutes long, and I'm also going to be doing a full dedicated review of SRM, a full dedicated review of DS Router 2.0, and all of the performance testing of this. But this video is about analysing this on its merits and indeed in some cases on its failings. So let's get started. So this RT6600ax was first revealed to us right at the end of 2021. It was at Synology's big kind of launch event there, and they talked about a bunch of things there, some surveillance stuff, some DSM 7.1 stuff, but this certainly came up. Now, people have been asking for an upgrade to the router series from Synology for quite a few years. They don't exactly slam their foot on the accelerator like they do with their NAS systems, and with this one, it was a long time coming. People have been asking for Wi-Fi 6, frankly, since they released the previous generation router, the RT2600. And with this device arriving with a price tag that's varying across different regions, but landing, taking into account tax and conversions, around the 300 to 350 Nika mark, this is not a cheap router. Indeed, given its general specifications, if you were to just scan the little spec table there, see that it's got 6 antennas, see that it's got a quad-core processor, see that it's got 2.5 GBE, see that it's got Wi-Fi 6, you would be forgiven to not wonder why aren't you buying one of these. This is the D-Link, this is the 5460, the DX5460, and this knocks around for about 150 quid. There's Asus routers with not dissimilar hardware to both this and this that are knocking around for about 200 Nika, and that includes a 2.5 GBE. Then you've got QNAP's Kahora router, which is 10 GBE on Wi-Fi 6, and that's knocking around for less than this. What exactly makes this router worth the extra buns? So before we get to the unboxing, let's talk about what Synology are keen to highlight about this system, because that is what they've been pretty much slamming in everyone's faces all this time. First and foremost, Wi-Fi 6 802.11ax, which scales it up from its previous revision of Wi-Fi Gen 5, which is like 8CN, etc. And that means large improvement in terms of performance. Wi-Fi 6 on its own isn't enough. It opens up another band of frequency there, and again, we will go into a lot more detail about that. But this system and its Wi-Fi 6 is ever so slightly different than a number of devices out there, because it also has access to, and it's one of the first, if not the first, there's only a couple that I could find and I couldn't find solid release, it's one of the first routers that is utilising the 5.9 gigahertz band. And what that means is, when it comes to radio traffic and radio frequencies, there's a lot of them out there. There's a tremendous range of coverage there, but some bands are reserved. They're reserved for the military, they're reserved for emergency services, they're reserved for public service announcements, and in the case of band 5.9, it was heavily restricted to the use of transportation services and communication of those services. And for a long time, it was massively underutilised. And as the generations of wireless frequencies were left abandoned, whereas the technology behind it could take advantage of these to pass more and more packets of data into those available bands, the FCC had to start opening up these bands a little bit more, and that's where 5.9 has come in. When you look at the spectrum of radio frequencies and the different kinds of data packets and the frequency that travels between them, these megahertz frequencies that break down into 20, 40, 80, 160, and indeed in Wi-Fi 7 320, that's a story for another day, these take up blocks and space within those channels. And you can't cross the channels so readily without basically affecting the transmission of packets of those data. So opening up the 5.9 band there, the result is that you can get more of the 80 megahertz and 160 megahertz channels, or not channels, but pathways next to each other within that frequency band. And the result is that a system like this that is able to take advantage of it and has that extra 5 gigahertz and mixed antenna architecture, the result is that it can produce much broader bandwidth to be shared between its connected devices, but also those connected devices can take advantage of individual 160 megahertz band in a way that previously fewer devices would have been able to do. So before we go any further, let's unbox this. There is our fairly boring brown packaging box there. I talk a lot about Synology packaging because if you don't really look at it too carefully, and I don't expect you will, you could just say it's the same old brown box design. They stuck a sticker on it. It isn't until you notice that it's a brown box, which they've obviously put a sticker on, but then all of the branding on the sides is product specific and printed to the box. Which one begs the question, why bother with the label? And also the fact that if they're going to go to that much trouble to print it onto the box, you could put something a lot nicer there on the front, but still nonetheless, it's still quite nice. It's dripping in Synology kind of design in terms of their packing. It's quite well protected. You can see some other Synology boxes, dead giveaway all around there. If we open it up, we see an oh so familiar sight when it comes to any, and I repeat, any router. The fact that this router arrives in that weird corrugated card that's cut out. I don't know of any other like regular IT tech hardware product that arrives in this cardboard. Why does it always arrive in this weird crate stuff? If someone knows in the comments, tell me. But of all the products that I've unboxed and featured here on the channel, only routers ever arrive like that. It doesn't matter by who the brand is, it just always arrives like that. Who knows? Anyway, information on a quick start installation guide. Again, relatively useful, but this device is incredibly straightforward to set up. Inside, we've also got, of course, the unit. Then we have got an Ethernet cable, although I will add, the Ethernet cable that this arrives with is quite a chunky monkey. It's, again, very well covered, very thick cable as well. Fair play to them. They have put their hand in their pocket and got a decent covered twistable cable there. I quite like that, but it's only the one cable, but there's arguments against wastage there. Then you've got the PSU. This is, I believe, a 42 watt PSU, and it is a big one. That is our wall PSU there, and again, it's one of the clippers. So again, if you're going to use this in different countries, you're going to have to buy in your own local area, because that looks like a particularly proprietary driven connector there on the top. Let's slide that back on. There is our PSU. And that's really it. There's nothing more in the box apart from that really weird cardboard. So we'll unpack that there. And here is our router. We lost a couple of weird bits of foam. That is what the router looks like. And of course, dripping in branding there, and a whole host of ventilation all the way along. Now, all of the antennas arrive, I hate seagulls, all the antennas arrive pre-applied, so we can move them straight out, and they're, fair play to them, they're pretty firmly attached. That's one thing I will say, whenever you buy a cheap router, these lose their sense of give very quickly, and even if you're sort of twisting them around, the threads inside them generally tear up very, very quickly. And the result is that the antennas just sort of flop down quite a lot. In this case, they're quite well put on there. They're already pre-attached. They're not coming off or going anywhere. You can wall mount this device or sort of desk mount it if you choose. But again, it's quite a big product. That is a large, large device there. Again, if we compare it against that D-Link we had down here, a couple of things are immediately apparent. One, this one weighs significantly less, the D-Link there. We will be comparing these at a later date, but despite them being very, very similar in terms of connectivity and design, this weighs almost 3 times as much by the feeling of it. And that one feels, you hear that noise? Whereas the Synology one, you're getting none of that. And I'm squeezing that pretty hard. So it's quite a solidly made thing, and it looks very much in the rhetoric of their products. We've got one of their own NASs just down there off shop, which we will be featuring in the software in just a moment. But let's talk a little bit about this device, talk a little bit about the hardware inside and how it does what it does. Now, first things first, let's be realistic. The big thing when it comes to coverage on this device, and particularly wireless coverage, is going to be about those antennas. Now, this system arrives with 3 separate covered frequency bands there. There's one 2.4 gigahertz band, and again, that provides 600 megabits or 60 megabytes of total bandwidth coverage. And bear in mind, all the numbers I'm about to tell you are shared bandwidth there. In most cases, you will not be able to find one device that will be able to take care of all of that bandwidth. The 5 gigahertz secondary primary band is the big one with 4,800 megabits per second total coverage potential there, so 480 megabytes there shared between a multitude of devices. And there's a secondary 5 gigahertz band that provides 1,200 megabits per second, so 120 megabytes per second. You might be able to create that single 160 megahertz connection there over Wi-Fi 6. Now, inside the system, alongside a main CPU and memory that I'll talk about later on, the system also features internally 3 separate Qualcomm-based controllers there, taking care of all of that network connectivity. And that's also with that primary 5 gigahertz band, how it cracks that 5.9 gigahertz frequency there. Now, one of the earliest questions a number of you are going to have when examining this product, much like when Synology released their previous router and it wasn't Wi-Fi 6, the question here is going to be, why is this not Wi-Fi 6E? Because let's face it, Wi-Fi 6E routers are rolling out. Netgear, TP-Link, D-Link, you name it, they're on it. And Wi-Fi 6E, which is able to take advantage of the 6 gigahertz band, is going to end up giving you a little bit more performance, but not a vast amount of performance. Synology have gone down this Wi-Fi 6 route and got access to the 5.9 gigahertz band there. Now that closes the stopgap quite substantially in terms of performance. And it's when you start examining that most devices are going to be still on the 80 to 160 megahertz band, whether they're using M2 wireless adapter upgrades like the Killer AX that I reviewed around about a year and a half ago, that was around £25, whether you're going to be using USB to Wi-Fi 6 adapters like the D-Link, that knocks around for about 40 to 50 quid. And of course, then when you look at the 2.5 GBE later on, that's when you see USB to 5 GBE adapters knocking around for about 25 quid, or 5 gigabits per second to USB adapters, which may be a waste on this, knocking around for about 50 quid. So increased bandwidth, upgradability, it's no longer a case you've got to slam in a new PCIe card and if you're on a laptop, go home. It's not the case anymore. Wi-Fi 6 is considerably more accessible than Wi-Fi 6E for a start, of which I do not believe there are USB adapters currently available in the market, whereas Wi-Fi 6, there are more ways to upgrade towards it over USB, over M2, over standard PCIe, and all of those are able to cover the 160 megahertz there that's going to be there's a large degree of population up to the 5.9 gigahertz band. Now, one thing this device promises, but unfortunately does not deliver on it right now at the time of recording, is full mesh support. This device can be meshed with another RT6600ax. No, thank you. That's like 300 to 350 notes. What I want is this to be able to mesh with this, but unfortunately it can't. Right now, SRM 1.3 that this arrives with is currently, at the time of recording, not available for the MR2200AC and other Synology routers before it. The result is that if you are looking to get this, you can't integrate it into your mesh of existing MR2200s that you may have. So that question about whether you should upgrade your RT2600AC towards this and then just leave all your mesh points where they are, hold your high horses. You might not want to go there yet until they start rolling out SRM 1.3 for those devices. Otherwise, you may be severing your network pretty neatly in two. So let's have a look at the network connectivity on this incredibly highly ventilated device. Before I go any further, actually, in the description there should be a link towards lots of internal photos of this, showing the enormous internal heatsink inside this, and the conglomerate of Qualcomm controllers and the Qualcomm main SoC inside. That's a 64-bit ARM that I'll talk about in a moment. Also LEDs on the front for all of those network connections there, as well as system activity, wireless activity, and activity there directly via the WAN, the wireless access there, not the wireless, the wired access there on the rear. On the base you've got the screws there, so you can wall mount this bad boy, something you weirdly couldn't do in the previous generation. Also the side here has got our Wi-Fi on/off and our WPS button there for automated connections, all fairly standard router stuff. Now, if we look at the rear connections there and take a good old look at them, we can see a good mix of things I like and things I don't like. Let me get to the good stuff first. So first and foremost, yes, there's a WAN. Yes, it's 1 GBE. Yes, it's dull as dishwater. But there's our little 2.5 GBE port there, sitting there knocking around in the background, waiting for our attention. That's great to see. But it is ever so slightly undermined by the fact that the other three next to it are 1 gigabit Ethernet. Now, having 2.5 GBE is great news, and it's faster than gigabit internet speeds are out there right now. This isn't just some niche business thing. Loads of home users, from UK users using Virgin to Verizon and all that stuff, there's loads of them out there. But the WAN port on this is 1 GBE. Now, that's not the end of the world, because you can assign this 2.5 GBE LAN port as a 2.5G WAN if you choose. But, and I'll touch on this again later on, there are reports, at least now in SRM 1.3, that will be addressed, apparently according to Synology, that if you use a custom tagged ID connection in your home and you've got running through a very bespoke network server, and you try to utilize that port instead of the WAN for your internet, it doesn't carry over the identifying tag. Now, again, what I've just said there was butchering the real point. If you go see Black Void, his review should be linked in the description as well. He goes into a lot more detail, personal experience. He's got his own 2.5 GBE ported in there with a custom tag, and he just hit a wall there, and that's something that he's hoping is going to be resolved soon. So rather than me try to butcher his scenario, go down, visit the review after this video. It'll give you more information on that. But you have still got the LAN ports there, and all of these LANs can be appropriated to their own private virtual LANs there. So within the software you can create another whole LAN network and then connect a switch to that virtual LAN by assigning it or bonding it to one of those ports. There's also failover support of utilizing the WAN in conjunction with that LAN port there, as well as utilizing say mobile phones with their own SIM connections and using tethering to using a USB dongle there. Now, this leads me to my other nice but also bloody annoying thing. So the USB port on this, you've got a USB 3 port on there, and you'll see more of this later on in the video with the software review. I love that port. I love it. It's a USB port. Why should I love it? Let's face it, it's archaic. It's a USB port. Get out. No, stay with me. That USB port there can be used for an external drive. Okay? You slam an external drive in there, and then from there, you have a bunch of Synology tools built into SRM. File station, again, all of this will be gone through later in a lot more detail, but you've got the full file station package there, the full download station package there. You can use the mobile applications for files, for downloads, for media with this router with an external drive there. On top of that, you can also back up from your phone using photo backup tools built into File Station to the storage on this device. That storage drive can also be used in conjunction with a bunch of apps in the App Center that you can download, including a Media Center tool, so you can stream all the multimedia from that drive through the router into all of the devices on the LAN. It's a really good thing. So what on earth am I so angry about? There's only one port. So if there's only one port, it means I can't use tethering. Tethering's off the table there with regards to a USB dongle or using my phone as a failover secondary internet connection in case the building internet dies on its arse. But two, the previous unit before this, the RT6600, that had two USBs. Yes, one of them was USB 2, okay. But there was still another connection there. Only having one forces you to make tough choices between the storage or using a secondary internet connection. And the problem is, once you use some of the apps in the App Center, some of them can't be used at all without storage. So you will end up connecting your storage to the rear of this device, and that's it. that's that drive there forever. Because if you disconnect that drive safely or unsafely, those apps ain't going to function. Their very purpose won't work, and therefore the logs that they store to the information being retrieved back and forth from them, it's just not going to work. So having tethering, but yet only giving me one port to choose between them, when people are going to use SIM dongles as a failover internet connection on this device, they've even got systems built into it to allow that to, once you go into the settings, you can play with these things. And they shouldn't have only put one port on this. Now, apart from that, I like everything about the physical connections on this device. I think it does an incredibly good job. But before we make our way onto SRM and DS Router 2 and take a look at the software and what's new and what's old and what's good and what's bad, let's talk about the internal hardware a bit. So let's talk about the internal hardware that keeps this thing running, because routers historically do not have aggressive hardware inside, and this is no exception. You're not going to see some Intel knocking around, smashing walls and kicking heads. This is going to be, it's running on an ARM. It's a Qualcomm processor, which with the exception of a few Realteks, that's pretty much all of the premium routers in the market are using. That Qualcomm processor is a quad-core 1.8 gigahertz processor in there. Again, still ARM, so it's using, compressed instruction throughout. It's also accompanied by a gig of DDR3 memory. That's two 512 meg blocks inside. And again, we've got the photos. You can go into the description where the full strip down of this is available there. Now, to put that into perspective, the unit that came before it, the RT6600, that arrived with a dual-core 1.7 gigahertz Qualcomm processor and half a gig of memory. So there is a big distinction, and more than double in almost every way in terms of the internal architecture of this. And bear in mind once again that this system is running those three different Qualcomm network processors, with these four antennas being fed into a double block of processors there on the side that are handling those 5 gigahertz, and these two antennas over here that are feeding into another one here, which I believe is running the 2.4. We've not had a full chance to really read into those processors, but again, we're updating the article below. Now, an enormous heatsink inside ensures that despite all that high amount of network connectivity, you're not going to need to have an active cooling fan. This isn't going to make any noise, which is always pleasant to know. And all of those antennas that are based all the way around this system are basically going to be doing all that work. They're filling up the network space, and all of that network connectivity, all of that wireless connectivity that you're going to be seeing on all of your devices running into it. So when we go into the software in a moment, what I'm going to be utilizing, and again, I'll sort of preface this later on, is I'm going to be utilizing an AX killer adapter on my laptop. I'm also going to be connecting via the 2.5 GBE connection. I'm going to be attaching some USB storage there. I'm going to install a bunch of apps, basically give you the full walkthrough of SRM. Once again, this is not the full review of SRM. That is a whole video coming very, very soon. It's already been recorded, just got to edit it. But for now, why don't we dive into this system, take a good look at the software, what it can do, what it can't do, and then at the end of the video, let's summarize what we like, what we didn't like, and ultimately answer those 3 questions. Okay, so here I am on the desktop of Synology Router Manager 1.3. We're just going to log in now. We're going in via an Edge browser. Before we go any further, it's worth highlighting again, I know I already touched on this, but this isn't the full review of SRM. That's going to be its own massive dedicated video along with the performance testing and another one. What we're looking at here for the review is mainly the features. We're going to talk a little bit about the things that have changed since 1.2, but also just generally the advantages that the Synology router management software brings, because again, we talked about a lot of routers over the last few years. Very few have got the kind of software and intuitive use of this, and although it's not perfect, and I will highlight when it's not, it's pretty bloody close right now in terms of router management. Now, I'm accessing this on my laptop. As you can see there, we've got 2 active connections with this. We've got one connection which is using a Wi-Fi 6 connection. It's that killer AX dongle there, and as you can see, we're running this on a 2.4 gigabits per second connection there, and this connection also goes and covers that 160 megahertz band. On top of that, I've also created a secondary connection with this device using a USB to 5 GBE dongle, the QNAP one, although of course there are multiple 2.5 GBE adapters in the market. But as you can see, I'm connected to this right now over a 2.4 gigabits per second connection and an additional 2.5 gigabits wired connection there, using that 2.5 GBE port there. Now, there's lots of things you can do. Even before we get to the router, I can talk a little bit about that USB port and the storage. I know I touched on it earlier on during kind of the hardware overview and the unboxing. But what's really cool is you can go ahead and patch into that drive if you choose to, there as a mapped drive if you choose. It's exactly the same as any storage that you would normally find on a Synology NAS system, and that's thanks to this system's quite great support of a lot of those NAS facilities. If you go into the package center, there's lots of applications there that NAS users will be familiar with, along with the media server and download station application there. You've also, of course, got File Station, which again, great stuff here. This isn't some Billy Basic, white screen breadcrumb file management here. We are talking full Synology File Station support with the ability to compress, extract, download, share file links, all with those validity periods, encrypted sharing, and more. All of that built into your router management of that storage. That was why I was so bummed out about this system only having one USB drive, because it's going to be great to use it for failover. It's just a real shame that the full capabilities of that USB when it comes to shared storage via this router aren't realised. Same goes for this router not having Plex Media Server, something I've touched on in other areas. There are routers out there in the market, prosumer routers right now, that you can install ARM or ARM-based versions of Plex Media Server, and it's a real shame you can't patch one of those on this. Maybe that's something for the modding community. Maybe they've already done it in SRM 1.2. But let's talk about this user interface. This is what you see when you log in via the web browser. We will take a little look later on at the DS Router 2.0 application as well. We've got a full review of that and of course an overview in this video. But again, control is fairly straightforward. You've got your main dashboard there of all the different applications, and you can go ahead and drag and drop the ones that are important to you just directly there onto the desktop as you need them. The control panel is quite intuitive, quite straightforward. Creating users, this is something that's another big part of this system. The way that you can create users very quickly. So if we call this person dummy, give them a very quick, easy, redundant password there. Say where we want them to have access to in terms of the storage. So again, we're going to give them access to the photos and the music for read and write, maybe read only to the video, and that's really it. That's all we're going to give that user. It's that straightforward. We're going to go into a little bit more detail later on about that stuff, but if you have a little look, you've got the usual secure stuff there, whether you want them to use the home services, something that's a little bit more useful when it comes to the DS application for mobile. And again, lots of the normal control stuff there. And again, managing your storage is quite detailed. Again, you've got the ability to create those remote accesses. There's support of WebDAV as well. I know it seems like I'm being overly focused on the storage, but I think this is an area that will get overlooked in many reviews, and I will be talking about obviously the router side of things, but a lot of that support of the USB drive there, quite extensive, and the file services there that you can enable for it to be accessible in a myriad of different ways on different protocols. And as mentioned, WebDAV is something you can throw in. Back-end terminal access, there are better ways and means of doing that. It has to be set externally, but you're going to need to enable it there. Standard notifications, there's a great reporting service that's also built in here that I am looking forward to showing you later on. And honestly, that report system, once you start utilizing it, it's really impressive. Again, usual sort of stuff you can see there from the architecture. We can go into the system settings there, a lot about the latest version of 1.3 that we're using. And again, I like that you can micromanage to the databases when it comes to the threat prevention and stuff like the Google Safe Browsing there, all built in, although you will, of course, need to take advantage of Google's API generation there. It's completely free, it's just a couple of little hurdles you're going to have to jump. But everything here, if you're a Synology NAS user, you're going to be pretty familiar with all this stuff. So when it comes to setting the device up the first time, you're going to have Security Advisor that you can use to scan the system, and that will go through and see where there are weaknesses. As you can see, some of those accounts I've created have got weak passwords. Something I should have touched on actually, I skipped over that. I like that the admin account is disabled by default. I didn't manually deactivate that. this does deactivate it by default. So again, that's something a lot of router providers could stand to emulate, by the way. Carrying on, again, you've got all the stuff there with the security advisor stuff it tells you to check. So it's going to be nice to have those automated services in the background. Now, when it comes to managing your network, that's going to come into two different phases, whether you're going to be managing the wireless network or the wired network. So if we look at the wired network to start with, and again, this does kind of meld into a lot of the SSID and wireless connections. As you can see, you can get some real-time information there at the bottom that will be populated over time about active connections. Then you've got all of your devices, as mentioned. I've got several devices connected to several different SSIDs. Let's full screen that there for you. And again, there's the usual stuff of being able to monitor your resources. I will say that the minute you start using USB drives, your memory will jump up. And a lot of this information, by the way, can be retrieved in historical data as well. And again, the ability to appropriate a lot of these ports towards remote level access and some of those VLAN stuff, things that are wildly overdue on the Synology platform. It's nice to see them here. Now, when it comes to managing those internet connections in terms of priority of service, in terms of bonding, in terms of failover, there are provisions here, but there's not really anything that's going to blow your mind. There's a few bits and bobs, some expected, some not. Stuff like getting the system to identify priority lines for things like VoIP, or if you're going to be using IPTV, where you're going to want those to have priority over everything else, especially VoIP for you business users out there. But then you've got things like your smart LAN, which leans towards that failover stuff where you can use a mobile phone, a supported mobile dongle. Weirdly, one of the mobiles that I used for my SRM 1.2 mobile connection video does not work on SRM 1.3, so I don't know if compatibility has changed. This is something I'm going to be revisiting in the SRM full review, but as it stands, I wasn't able to test this feature simply because the mobile that worked on SRM 1.2 with my MR2200AC didn't seem to work with SRM 1.3, so I don't know if that's a change of pace there. But again, lovely stuff, all straightforward, and the remote access, of course, don't worry about this on screen. All of this is going to be wiped after the review. Then you've got port forwarding and the ability to create some of those virtual networks there. And again, as you can see, I've created some of those virtual networks. Port forwarding, I shouldn't have skipped over that so quickly. It's something that a lot of routers should have. And it's always going to be difficult to make something like this user-friendly. It just is. And I know a lot of this stuff is already visible in SRM 1.2, but a lot of you watching this video, this might be your first jump into Synology's router system, and therefore you kind of want to see the lay of the land. Apologies for the break-in recording there. I just had to kill off one of these network connections that I created just to guide you through exactly how it's done. Now, of course, as mentioned, virtual LAN creation is something Synology should have integrated a great deal sooner than this. It's taken a while, but finally it's here, and at least it's integrated into that great software. And the fact that you can create these networks very quickly and meld them into one of the multiple SSID support, and I think you can have up to 15, then, that's all going to come together quite nicely. So, for example, going and clicking create, we create our new one. We're going to go with test LAN SSID. And we can put it on that IP, but we can change that IP if we so choose. But for now, we're going to keep that subnet mask. We're going to leave that VLAN ID. And again, we can choose whether we want to access the Synology Router Manager via this port. I'm going to say yes. Then from there, we can say which of these ports we want to assign to this if we choose to. And again, we don't have to. We can just leave it as a wireless or just an existing one that can be accessed by all if we choose, rather than dedicate. From then, we can choose if we want to create a brand new SSID. So this is going to be vidtest SSID new. Again, give it a password. We don't have to give it a password, but it helps. And then from there, you've now created our brand new VLAN. It doesn't take very long. We've got our new network. This new network can be utilized for things like cameras, all that VoIP stuff as mentioned. If we attached that to a single RJ45 port there on the rear and then connect that to a switch, we could run multiple cameras via that one port. We could run Office devices, we could run Office PCs, we can run that as just a standard backup. We can even dedicate that to the standalone 2.5 GBE connection there. Now, I may have touched on this previously because I'm recording these slightly out of sequence because I had to set this device up, but There are reports, particularly from Black Void. If you go and contact Rusty there, do check out his review. Hopefully that's linked in the description as well. As I don't have a greater than gigabit connection here, I wasn't able to test this to the same extent. But if you are running custom tagged IDs on your connections, you may hit a stumbling block when utilizing that 2.5 GBE connection as your incoming internet connection, as the WAN tag ID and utilizing port 1 tag ID, the system doesn't quite support that switchover. Again, Rusty goes into way more detail. If you go into the description there, find the link to his review, and he goes into a lot more detail on that. Synology have said they are working on this for later this year, but it is something that people that want to utilize this router with the 2.5 GBE on a custom tag are something they're going to have to kind of face in advance. But other than that, the VLAN is exactly how I would like it. Again, the standard static and dynamic routing there, and traffic control. This, as good as this is to do this here, and you can do the traffic for individual devices, this really comes into its own when it comes to that safe access that we'll talk about in a moment. Same goes with the usual auto blocking. I would expect that firewall creation all built in. The services that you can turn on and off, although I will highlight something that hasn't been touched on a lot of places. If you are utilizing this router in wireless AP mode, that is to say you're using the router behind an existing router from your internet service provider. So if you're using your router and landing it into an existing router you've been given, some of the options I've shown you today will not be visible. The only way you can get all of the configuration and all of the control is to patch this router in as a direct point of access. That's really, really important. So if you do come into this system and you're not seeing some of these options here on screen, that is why. But again, it will come down to your own personal network environment there. So lots of little bits and bobs there. When it comes to the wireless connectivity, if we go into the wireless connect, this is where we can manage a lot of those connections. There's lots of stuff we can talk about good, and indeed bad is probably not the right word, but I would say a little bit disappointing. And one of those is the Wi-Fi access points, because at the time of recording, you can't connect anything but another RT6600ax, although this router apparently will eventually be able to mesh with the MR2200AC router to allow mesh added points in your home. Right now, as there isn't a version of 1.3 for those routers, but there is for the 6600, unfortunately you cannot mesh with them. So for example, if we got a wired mesh point there, we go ahead, I've connected a mesh router here, and I've connected it via the LAN, so I tried it with wireless as well, but just in case you needed to see it, it will pick up the MR2200 that I've connected with this router on the LAN, unless I've disconnected it between our testing. As you can see, it has appeared. And if you try to use it, current SRM does not support this type of mesh configuration. So as you can see, right now you can only mesh with other RT6600ax's, which is tremendously impractical, at least right now. So if you are looking to replace the existing RT2600 in your home with this new router, and you're using existing mesh points, I wouldn't do it yet. I'd wait until SRM 1.3 has been rolled out for the older generations of Synology router. Now, we have a look at the Wi-Fi settings there, and again, we can see those custom SSIDs that I've created. You can manage them a lot. You can choose if you want to dedicate them to certain bands, because obviously this router has those 3 bands, and 5 Hz 1 is the one you want to go for, the one with that much wider 4,800 megabits per second coverage there, which is shared across all of those devices. But again, lovely, quick, easy stuff there. And you can see the devices that I've got connected there. So again, we've got a mobile phone device there we're using for the DS review. We've got this Android, and we've also got a desktop PC routed in via a switch just outside of the office environment. Again, wireless control, very, very good. But real control, and that's the big word here, control, is this bad boy right here. It is when we want to manage all the devices in our network. We may have to full screen this bad boy. Now, as you can see, all the devices that you list are, we've seen up to this point have been kind of listed on there. And you can go ahead and create a brand new profile. And with this profile, we can give this person either an identity, or if we're using things like a NAS, a printer, scanner. Basically a device, you can give it a network identity rather than a human identity. So a human identity is very straightforward. You can give them a photo, give them a name, and then from there you'll click test, and then it will list devices that are on the network, and then you can say who owns them. So if we say this test person, we're not going to say it's the router because we're going to save that for the next one, but say they own the desktop device there, click create. From there we can see we've created that person. You can give them a lot more identity than that, but as you can see, test now, we can choose if we want to when they're allowed to use this device, so you can suspend their connectivity on that device, how long they're allowed to use it, and this will be shared across multiple devices, not just if they have the one, but if they've got multiple. You can then choose web filtering, which sites they can go to, which ones they cannot. Then you can enable safe searching if you choose, and again that includes safe search being imposed. If they go to Google, it will force them to have safe search on whether they try to play with it or not with their account. And that's really it. And you can add more devices as you choose, and those devices will all come under this same safe search banner here. So it means if you give them exactly 3 hours of internet a day, then that 3 hours of internet a day is shared across all those devices. They can't try to use 3 hours, use 3 hours, use 3 hours. And if you've got your kids when you're doing homework, or you've got staff that you want them to only have access to certain websites for a certain length of time, whether it's a custom routine or dedicated routines that are built into the profiles, it's all ready and available there. So the next thing you can do, of course, as mentioned, is create a network identity. So you can go ahead and create a network profile, and from here you can say with the network profile, so we're going to give this the test network there. Go ahead there, click create, and then this profile is that separate wireless network that we've created, and that network can also have hardware dedicated to it. So for example, here we have got my NAS. We've left the NAS there. We can add those filters and controls there as we see fit, and indeed you can go right the way into people's profiles and actually find out quite a lot of information about them if you dig deep. And again, their behavior, what they're allowed to see when they've tried to go to dodgy websites. We did a test earlier on with Pornhub. You can try all the different things, as well as open up the door to access requests, where if they go to a website that's being filtered negatively, you can have a notification that gives you, the admin, or the parent in this case, more likely, the ability to turn that on or off. And indeed, you can set up an alert that's an angry screen that basically says do not go there. And the same goes if you want to create a wireless profile as well, where if you create a guest account, you can actually create a splash screen for that guest account if you choose, where it, if they log in, much like if you log in on the train or anything like that, it will all appear on screen. And again, if you're using wireless devices, you've got multiple bands here, and you can also take advantage of their Smart Connect feature that will jockey your device between the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz network very, very quickly and easily. It's a really, really well put together system here. And again, there are external tools, such as the network tools there for bench testing connections to certain IPs or certain websites. And again, you can use this predominantly just to check that your connection is stable. And again, if that's where that kind of failover connection comes in. But SRM, at least on this router, is still just as good as ever. It's a little bit more polished. It's certainly a lot more responsive. SRM 1.2 wasn't unresponsive, but this is a whole different kettle of fish. And I haven't even touched on the VPN Plus stuff with the site-to-site backup license that's included inside. The VPN license that Synology offers you with VPN server isn't quite as cut and dry as it sounds when it comes to the free VPN license, when compared to our traditional VPN licenses you can buy online. But it's still a great extra to be included in this device. And again, you can find out more information about this in the description there. But overall, I like SRM the desktop there. I like SRM 1.3. I like the features it's added. It doesn't feel like it's fully integrated across other devices, and I don't know why they've released the new router with SRM 1.3 and not updated the others on day one. Maybe that will change in the next week or so. And then, of course, if you hit any brick walls, you can always use the help guides, which even I turned to a couple of times when I was looking at FileStation to create that remote access share that I mentioned earlier on. But overall, I like SRM 1.3. There was never going to be any doubt in that. It's not a huge evolution. And again, sub-revisions very rarely are, but overall I like what I'm seeing here. The customization is still good, the access is good, and the control is good. Let's make our way over to the mobile and have a little look at DS Router 2.0. Okay, so we've made our way over to the mobile screen here, and we can go ahead and make our way into the DS Router app. As you see, I've already logged into the device, and this is what we see. Now, unlike SRM 1.3, where a lot of the differences feel like they're very much in the background for the most part, when it comes to the new Router app, I kind of like the amount of control that I've now got, and this feels like more of a significant upgrade for a lot of the parts. So, for example, you can see a lot of those wired devices we talked about earlier on, lists between them, and we can apply a lot of different control features. I hate SEAGULLS. So again, this is the device we're contacting on here, and as you can see, we can do a lot of stuff right there at the bottom, lower its priority, pause its internet access very, very quickly on the fly. And again, all of this can be done remotely if we so choose. Same goes, if we scroll down, we can choose whether to share this network with another person using a 3D barcode, or just sharing the link directly to someone from our phone, which is always going to be helpful, something that the old app always had. But really, it was more about the level of control we had on devices in the local area network. So, for example, if we go into the safe access area here, we can control a lot more of that information and access just like we could there on the desktop using the GUI. So for example, we look at the Robbie account there, we can see how long he's been online today, but we can go back to historical data because we've added that. We can edit a lot of the details about this user if we choose. Again, look at my stupid face. From there, we can apply some of those scheduled filters, web filters, and more. We can even change devices ownership if we so choose, very, very quickly on the fly. We can even attend to some of those notifications when a new website has been visited that the admin or overall power user needs to approve or disapprove. And all of that can be done very quickly here from the desktop interface there. And as you can see, there's the access requests and the web filter that we can change once again on the fly remotely. We don't have to be on the LAN. I am accessing this, of course, on the LAN, but at the same time, you can do this via the Quick Connect system logged in just like any other app. Now, the settings menu here is pretty substantial, notwithstanding the fact that you can access the USB drive. And before you ask, absolutely, you can log straight into DS File and you can still access this NAS remotely if you choose. So again, as you can see, we can access all of those files and folders. And again, the same goes for if you want to access it on a music level, access it via the Download Station application. You can use this router in conjunction with the existing Synology storage apps where appropriate. Again, lots of information already and available, all of it listed there on the app, all lovely and clear. It's tremendously user-friendly and, as you might expect, very easy to use. You can even, add some of those nodes, and when they do allow some of the older generation Synology routers to be used as a mesh point with this system, it's nice to know we can still use the app in order to access and connect those all together. Now, the traffic monitor, I would recommend, it's not on by default, to make your way into the settings menu and make sure you store historical data. You will need to have an area of storage to do that, but the level of information you can get is actually pretty good. And you can break it down by device, you can break it down as an overall network connection and internet connection, and you can break it down to the internal services to find out where that data is being used. So yes, there's some lovely monitoring accessible points there, all from the mobile app, all tremendously responsive there, exactly what you want to hear. And the same goes for if you want to play with some of those ports, play with some of the connections, if you want to amend some of the security stuff there. All of that is still done by the app now. It just feels a little snappier. There are some areas where Synology have clearly not tried to reinvent the wheel, but they have stuck on a few extra spokes while still maintaining the integrity. And I respect that, I really do. And although there are things about this router in terms of its hardware that left me slightly wanting, which I'll talk about in my conclusion in just a moment, in terms of the software, I'm glad they've just doubled down on the features, doubled down on usability, doubled down on that flexibility, and if anything, just improved the number of ways in which you can configure what is there. Some might argue a little late to the party, but at least it is there. Let's move back to the studio and summarise everything we've seen today and do our final verdict on this router. So, overall, what do we think? I've got to say, overall, on point, completely on paper, I can recommend this router, definitely. I know my world is NAS and I talk about routers only intermittently, but I know a quality product when I see one. However, I say this with a bunch of provisos. There's a bunch of things I like and there's a bunch of things I don't like, but there is definitely an intended audience for this, and most users are going to be able to take advantage of it. However, if you're an existing Synology RT6600ax user, I am less convinced that you need to upgrade to this system right now. Unless you want to jump on board the Wi-Fi 6 train, this system, I don't think, as it stands currently, serves as a good enough replacement for your existing 2600 AC. If you've not jumped into Synology routers for your home or business environment, this is definitely the best place to start, hands down. Notwithstanding SRM 1.3, which will eventually land on all those other systems anyway, and therefore you'll get things like VLAN and stuff, and that SSID control. But with this system, there's just a lot more power under the bonnet, and how it is facilitated into that software is even more impressive. More so, these days 2.5 GBE is a great deal more available out there than ever before, as well as Wi-Fi 6. And even if you haven't jumped on board with those and you're using older or more legacy-based systems, you've got things like Wi-Fi 6 dongles knocking around these days that will add a Wi-Fi 6 connection and, between 1.8 and 2.4 gigahertz connection with your router. And if that's not available, then you've got adapters. There's loads of adapters out there that will connect you via USB 3, old-style USB 3 as well, of 3.2 Gen 1, to the 2.5 gigabit Ethernet connection there. Which again means that if you are about to make the jump into a new router, that means this system does have a bit more future-proof and it has a bit more longevity. Not completely, which I'll get onto my negatives, but let's break it down into some bullet points for me. What is it that I like? Number one, SRM. I'll be frank, it's still the dog's danglies. It is brilliant. I still love SRM. I think it's Synology taking the rhetoric, design and user experience, education and knowledge they have from DSM, and they've plowed it straight into easily one of the best software platforms that any router has ever arrived with. Secondly, they've finally embraced 2.5 GBE. Not as much as I would have liked. It would have been great to see it in, more than just one port there. And I know currently, and again, I mentioned it in the video, check out Black Void's review. There's lots of stuff about custom ID tagging and using the 2.5 GBE as your WAN port there. Do check that out. But still, nonetheless, 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, hopefully this is a good point that the brand is going to start integrating that over 1 GBE. But only having one port, it's a bit of a bummer there. Next, let's face it, safe access with device, user, network, appliance and system overall control in such an intuitive and user-friendly, easeable way, cannot fault that. Same goes for the failover support and the WAN support, taking advantage of, say, a mobile phone being connected to the device as a secondary, as well as 2 active internet connections. So easy to set up and so many ways in which that's going to benefit you. Then there's the USB support. USB support on this, I mentioned it towards the end of the video, but let's be honest, the support of USB on this is practically NAS quality in terms of the streaming, in terms of the information, and I do strongly recommend you watch my full-length SRM 1.3 review that's going to arrive in the next day or so, where I really go into a lot more detail about the USB port on this. And the fact this has broken into the 5.9 gigahertz band there can't be ignored. That's going to be hugely beneficial to a number of users. And even you guys saw in the software review when I was connecting this laptop via 2 active connections. When I connected this dongle into another PC, and you'll see that more in the performance testing video, we were able to largely saturate that 4,800 megabits 5 gigahertz 1 band on this to fully spec out that full range, as we were able to occupy it with more 160 megahertz connections thanks to the 5.9 opening up there. And threat prevention, although I think that could still do with a little bit more development, it's still great, and things like Google Safe Access and Safe Search and all the other stuff built in make this a great router. What did I not like? I don't like that this system has arrived with 1.3 as its software revision yet. The mesh points still only have 1.2. This is something that's going to change depending on when you're watching this video, but the fact that I can't just remove a 2600 AC from my existing network, replace it with this and connect with all of my nodes on day one, I'm not a big fan of, but again, that will change. Secondly, the 5.9 gigahertz adoption, as good as that is, the opening of that channel, this being effectively one of the first routers that can do that, we're still waiting to see how client devices are going to pick up on that. Not all of them will. Some of them will still only work within the 80 megahertz band, and therefore, although there'll be more of those available, it's not really the full potential, and those will be the devices that are hitting like 1.2 gigabits per second. Also, and again, all these are things I touched on, there's only one USB port. That's cheap. Don't get me wrong, the RT6600 may have had a USB 2 port and a USB 3 port, but that was still 2 ports. And I think, yes, it would have been a slower port, but I would have liked to have had another USB port on this, because I don't want to have to choose between USB storage, which a lot of those applications in the App Center needed, I should add, but then not be able to take advantage of a mobile phone connected via a USB cable or a bunch of other USB appliances. Only having one port is not great. And yes, I'm sure someone's screaming at me, why didn't you use a multi-port adapter? And you're right, maybe I could have, but it still would have been one USB 3 port being sliced and chopped up, and that's still a power concern and it's a bandwidth concern. So there should have been more USB ports on this. And finally, let's be straight about this, the price tag. Including tax, you're looking in the 300 bracket, depending on your currency conversion, probably in the later, closer to the 400 including the tax. That is not a cheap router, and given that it is not the first Wi-Fi 6 router in the market by any margin, by at least a couple of years commercially, and indeed now we are seeing Wi-Fi 6 routers changing hands for less than 100 and Wi-Fi 6E routers entering the market. Yes, I know the price tag is leveraged a lot more towards that great software, as is the Synology way. It's still a big price tag for this router. It's hugely capable, but I think people that aren't going to take advantage of that full software are going to bulk paying that extra price. And given a lot of IT guys and IT profs judge a lot of hardware by not just the software but the hardware as well, this may come across wanting. But for the most part, this is a great router and easily the best router Synology ever put out there, and definitely one of the best Wi-Fi 6 routers, if not the best Wi-Fi 6 router I've ever featured here on the channel. We will be comparing this against the Asus AX series router very, very soon, and of course we're going to be comparing it against QNAP's QHORA Wi-Fi 6 10GBE router. They've gone very different ways of hardware design and indeed software design that are worth touching on. But otherwise, I hope you have enjoyed today's review. I know it's been a long one, but this is a completely new kind of device, and it's not like when there's a new NAS every year or 6 months. So if you have enjoyed it, chuck me a like. There isn't a dislike button anymore, and that used to be how we could gauge things. And of course, it not being there, you know, if you enjoyed this, click like. If you want to learn more about this, because again, I've got about 10 videos on this thing coming in the next 2.5 weeks. So subscribe so you're alerted when they go live. You don't have to go Patreon or anything like that. I might have to do that one day, but right now it's subscribe, you find out when they're live. And finally, if you still are on the fence or you don't quite know what to buy for your storage setup, router or otherwise, use the free advice section linked in the description. Genuinely free. It's manned by me and Eddie. We will help you and give recommendations on what you need. We're two humans with lives. It might take us an extra day or so to answer, but we try to answer every single one. There's donate buttons. Use them, ignore them. It's up to you. And of course, there are links to buy this in the description. This is the internet. This is how these things work. If you use the links in the description to buy this router or any product, it supports the channel. We get a kickback. We can keep these things running. So if you're convinced and you want to buy this, or you've thought, do you know what, stuff it, I don't like it, I want to buy something else, if you can use the links to help support these services, it's always great. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.